We are talking about the invisible city at reSITE, at this conference. But is the invisible city also already an inefficient and outdated city? According to the study Growth Within Europe, about the circular economy in Europe, 60% of office space in Europe is unused. And that is actually in office hours. 50% of residential dwellers, and this may surprise quite a lot of you, report that they have too much space. Cars are standing still, as in parked and unused 92% of the time. Isn't it time that we, as architects and urbanists, begin to seriously consider this? UNStudio has been exploring the workings of the invisible city since the early 1990s in the form of flow structures of interconnected mobilities. Our premise has been that the server spaces, the ignored in-between, and the crude machinic leftover spaces have always been full of potential. And they were also deserving of quality. They had the potential for quality. More and more of our daily lives are spent in real and virtual, or a mixture of both, networked infrastructures. We want to engage with this reality in a questioning way. The network society has been a theoretical and scientific concept for some decades now. But how can we, in our design practices, use this concept, give it a creative meaning, and thereby bring our own discipline a step further? As architects and urban designers, we have always been engaged with the future. You could say we partly live in the future, because we're always, we know that what we are doing is for the future. And we are therefore familiar with the future to some extent, you could say. But what about the disruptive effects of technological changes? Can we adapt our processes to accommodate unanticipated changes? Can we find models of flexibility and resilience, like our two acrobat artists, that fit with our practiced ways? Someone I admire, Doreen Massey, wrote, "How in the face of all the movement and intermixing can we retain any sense of local place and its particularity?" And I think this is a question that resonates. I always find that when I speak somewhere, this is ultimately for many people the most important question. And Doreen Massey continues, "Can't we rethink our sense of place? Is it not possible for a sense of place to be progressive, not self-enclosing and defensive, but outward-looking? A sense of place which is adequate to this era of time-space compression. We must react to the hyper-mobility and flow of our time with our architecture." When we were a young practice, and I think it's not that long ago, but in reality it's a long time ago, this was one of our first projects. It's now 20 years old. And when we were designing it, nothing stood behind it. It was an empty space behind this maybe enigmatic figure of the bridge. And the purpose of the whole bridge was to attract urban regeneration. And as we can now see, it has successfully managed to do that, and is now framed by the beautiful, magnificent backdrop of the latest Rem Koolhaas art piece. Circular economy is not just about materials and recycling, as is sometimes thought. Flow-based urban regeneration has a lot to do with circular principles. As we saw, as I said when I started out, the very use of the built environment is questionable. So let's not think only about the building industry and the construction processes and how they produce waste, but let's also actively consider how we can produce waste, how we, in our architecture, can help people become more efficient and have a better use of their own resources. Resources are wasted in systemic, structural ways by how we produce the built environment. I think one of our biggest challenges is to change that and to contribute as only we as design professionals can to that change. The Netherlands has committed to making a big effort in that way, as many other places are doing. And the reasons why we should all think about this is because a lot of potential, again, can be derived from reshaping mobility and the city. There is potential for innovation, which alone is interesting to us, for new qualities that enrich the city and make it attractive to new generations, to new people that we want to keep inside our city, the best talent. And there is economic benefit in increasing resource benefit and decreasing resource dependency and waste. Maybe as architects we are not so used to considering resources. We maybe don't yet have a philosophy of resources that we feel comfortable with. But why not think about it? At least some of us will find an inspiration in this new way of thinking, maybe, beyond opportunity, beyond economics, although they are very real, and also beyond ideology. UNStudio has been trying to work with these principles for several years. This, for instance, is a project that we tried to realize. It was a pitch in Paris, Tour Bioclimatique. It is an example where we have natural ventilated double facades. And these encapsulate new ways of working, new workspaces, so sustainable principles and attainable principles are also combined with parametric design. There's a parametric form finding because the very parameters that we select can also contribute to very particularized and site-specific forms of circular thinking. Like all architects, we do not even protect our own creative resources. This is all stuff that we are almost daily throwing away. We design so much that is never realized. How can we be smarter and learn from what we learn? Just giving a name to what we are trying to do can help. It can bring us a step forward. Our visions and ambitions can become systemic themselves, can become more productive if we call it, if we dare to call something that we want to achieve something. And even in the history of our own short time here as a practice, there have been so many disruptive innovations in architecture already. For a practice to be working fluently, more or less fluently, in the worldwide field of architecture requires almost military strategizing. How do you position yourself? At the same time, the complexity of that all is so vast that plotting your progress is hopeless at the same time. Things just happen or not. And sometimes maybe things are just in your DNA. Being a Dutch practice, we have very strong Dutch DNA. And like Dutch people giving each other more flowers than any other nation, The Dutch culture is also one of a history of big interventions, which can be totally experimental and which are carried through. UNStudio has always liked diversity. We embrace different scales, programs and places. So the experimental approach just suits us completely fine. Typology is there for us also to be disrupted. How can you become unstuck? So let's not think about housing. Let's not think about a museum. Let's not think about a train station. How can we reframe that? This is a very important question to us. Not to lose the advantages of experience. So we still want to take the resources that we build up internally ourselves seriously, but at the same time we want to keep the experiment going. For the last 5 years or so, therefore, we have seriously sought to become immaterial ourselves, to turn ourselves into a knowledge platform, at least partly. Of course, we also still do projects, but some of our essence we would like to see become dissolved in the ether. And we confront an enormously impactful change. If open source and sharing are where the world moves to, what does that mean for our processes? You don't have to engage with that, you might argue. No one is holding a gun against your head. Why should you become open source? Just keep going as you are. But don't we want to celebrate our own time? And what about the future? How can we begin to envision a future of which the only visible signs are the atomization of knowledge and a sense of being able and also entitled to instantly connect to anything, anywhere and anytime? Reorganizing ourselves to meet these disruptive innovations has become something UNStudio does. It's a habit that begins at home in Amsterdam, where we practice our knowledge sharing. And this then in turn also facilitates how we practice in the world. We've become accustomed to the fluency of that process in different places. So just a question, could it be that this is in a way working towards circularity? Design reputation is an architectural resource. It travels across the layers and subdivisions of the global system. There is no literal formal repetition in architecture. That is not the efficiency, the type of efficiency that we cultivate. But we translate, we communicate, and we enlist participants, thereby bonding across cultures. Our interest in networking, in the network, and in fact, I just quoted from some network theory when I mentioned the word enlisting by Bruno Latour, we are very interested also in understanding what we are doing at a level that goes beyond the very pragmatic. So our interest in the network actually stems from that earlier mentioned project, where we had to learn a new form of control. We were young, inexperienced practice, had built only a tiny little project, one exhibition design and one small regional office. And suddenly we were in charge of this big project. Obviously, you cannot execute your vision in a top-down manner in that position as some, extremely respected architect might be able to do later in their career. I doubt that that will happen to our generation, as we seem to have lost those ways completely, which I think is a good thing. So new concepts of control are key. And this is where we go to this project already mentioned, Arnhem Central. Immediately after the Erasmus Bridge was completed in 1996, we embarked on this project, which then took us 20 years to fully complete. At the basis of this project are 5 important needs that are actually interconnected, that are interpreted by us as relational in a non-hierarchical way. So we can't say one need takes precedence over another. One value can override another. Those needs are that there was the need for a whole new transfer hub. The old railway station had long been superseded, was far too small and ineffective, and there were some bus stations around it that were also could be in need of upgrading. Urban regeneration was an important aspect of that, and densification. Then there was a need for external funding. There was no way the municipality, who became the primary actor in the process, could fund the process by itself. Enhanced connectivity, both within the city and outside, was important. And also an important design consideration was that the station needed to continue to be fully operational all the while during the process. So we started with this very first early analysis, where we could encourage from this the municipality to take control. They could be, as I said, the primary actor, the initiative taker, rather than the national railways, who were actually the most important stakeholder in terms of business and in terms of land ownership. But this diagram showed that, in fact, in terms of use of the location, they were not, because the train was only, depending on how you would calculate it, used by 27 to 36% of the people, and the location was more used by others. And as I've just tried to argue, when we are thinking in terms of circular principles, use also becomes a very important resource. A very important way to learn concepts of control also for us was the development in this project of what we now call resilient tools. When you are dealing with a project that is taking place in a phased way over a long period of time, it's very important that your design principles are so strong that they are able to stand these disruptions, all the different disruptions that happen over a 20-year period of time. You get political changes, you get financial setbacks, you get a whole new technologies and conceptualizations. So how, as a designer, can you think of tools that can hold up through all these changes? Those are actually super resilient tools if you manage to find them. For us, we found the solution in very abstract concepts that have a strong geometrical basis. So they are not directly related to specific forms or ideas, but they have a more abstract model that can be interpreted in different ways and that can be adapted as changes happen. Here we see, for instance, the central twist to the project is an example of that. Here we see it finally executed. It was executed quite similarly eventually to the Erasmus Bridge by a shipbuilder in steel, whereas originally it had been conceived by us as in concrete, and the lower parts of it still are in concrete. So this project takes place also over many layers, and as we can see in the image on the left, the complete integral approach to it means that the leftover in-between transitional flow spaces that I mentioned, such as, for instance, an entrance to the parking garage, as we see on the left, has daylight in it and is also turned into a space of quality. Now, another important aspect when dealing with disruptive technologies is, of course, how do you deal with technologies? Again, we have found this something that we have, from our earliest beginnings, found very interesting and inspiring. The Möbius house, for instance, we made this model for 20 years ago again, and this is a recent photograph of the house. And what is very remarkable is that the people who it was designed for still live there very happily in the same way as was originally envisaged. Now, this house, you could say, in some ways could not be more inflexible than it is, since it is very much built out of concrete, and even the concrete takes up some of the furniture. But it has been able to accommodate changes over a 20-year period of time. So I think if we look into, seriously begin to study post-occupancy issues, each of us in our own projects, but also in general, we might find that flexibility and adaptivity are also very complex issues and need a lot of fine-tuning and forward thinking, rather than seeing it in a very simple way of providing the most neutral space possibly, and then, of course, it is flexible. In reality, this is the issue of flexibility, adaptivity, and resilience turns out to be far more complex. Another project now actually already celebrating 10 years also shows the enormous importance of incorporating technology. Our whole plan for Mercedes-Benz revolves around an open atrium. This atrium has only been able to stay open and like this because a new technology was invented, which you see on the left image, which is called the tornado, and which is activated in case of fire, and then sucks out all the smoke that goes through the building. Because of this, there is not compartmentalization necessary, which there would have been otherwise necessary of the project. And now, a very recent, almost completed project in China also works on the principles of very highly technological integration, and also bringing a sense of infrastructure to the different scale. The Möbius house was already bringing that to the domestic scale. People walk around the house. The walk around the house is the basic organization of the house. The Mercedes-Benz typology is also about walking through the building, the paths that lead you through the collection. And this project brings that to yet another and far more encompassing scale level. where we again believe very much in daylight being part of the quality of the spaces of flows. Then our last pillar of circular thinking, designing for the future, also means designing for health. This is a very recent little study that we presented at Salone in Milan, and which is about as a first study into how spaces can affect your stress levels. I think Martin also pointed out to quality of life, and quality of life also during work being something very important to consider. And what are the new technologies that we can find to help us implement this? Another very recently completed project brings this to the scale of the campus. New ways of working where sustainable issues are fully integrated with these health issues of creating walkable surfaces. So within this campus model, two spines have been identified, a spine of learning and a spine of living. And within those two spines, there are these nodes, and these are nodes of activity, active hubs, where cross connections happen, where informal learning takes place, and also where inside and outside conditions often mix. For instance, this cafeteria can be open air, but also can be closed off and then can be air conditioned. Thereby, in the overall building, we limit the use of the need of air conditioning and how it is designed. Now, finally, a very latest experiment where we are together with many different partners, also thinking for Amsterdam about the future of the city, bringing the circular thinking to this project. This is the ring. This consists of the ring of Amsterdam. As in the future transportation will change, this will release a lot of infrastructural space. We can see that the ring, which is at present very low in density, has very, very good connections all around, both to the city center but also to the outside. And we have worked with different partners on looking at that locations, looking at densification, the possible densification models there that can be made there, how they would be distributed, how the new infrastructure would look like, and also we have studied with an organization that has a data bank of ground values, in that how ground values come into this study. So to conclude now, it is to be expected that a city with a circular mobility system could replace excess infrastructure with housing, with workplaces, green spaces, etc. Here we are even foreseeing that these buildings will be energy generators themselves. These hubs will take on many different identities. By 2030, effects such as sharing mobility services, the materials evolution, and also system-level integration of different transport modes can contribute to resource savings of nearly 400 billion euros as compared to now. And these three factors are all factors that we, as architects and urban designers, can contribute to. This is the first time that I actually end presentation with naming figures, and particularly euros, dollars, etc. But I think I have, as I've showed, I believe very much myself, and UNStudio does too, that it is more circular thinking, and the principles, the opportunities for generating new qualities and innovation that really are at heart here, and which I look forward to discussing with you. Thank you.